Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a situation that has captured global attention, stirred debates, and raised new questions about the direction of the conflict. The idea that Russian troops in Crimea may be reaching a breaking point as pressure continues to mount around the peninsula. Whether you've been following developments from the beginning or you're just now getting into the story, the tension surrounding Crimea feels more intense than ever. What we're seeing now isn't just another chapter in the conflict. It's becoming something that could reshape the entire landscape of this war. The situation isn't simple. Crimea has been one of the most heavily fortified regions under Russian control for years. It has massive strategic value, culturally, politically, and geographically. For Russia, holding on to Crimea has always been about more than territory. It represents a gateway to the Black Sea, a platform for power projection, and a symbol of national pride. But over time, what once seemed like an unshakable stronghold has become a region under increasing pressure, with supply routes strained, logistical routes disrupted, and tensions growing across the peninsula. From a strategic standpoint, Crimea's geography both helps and hurts Russia. While the peninsula is heavily fortified, it's also limited in its supply routes. In any conflict, supply lines are everything. They determine how long troops can be sustained, how effectively they can respond, and how well they can reinforce their positions. When those supply chains begin to weaken, even a strong defensive position can become vulnerable. That's exactly the scenario some analysts say we're watching unfold right now. The question many people have is what surrounded really means in this context. It doesn't necessarily mean troops are encircled in a classic battlefield sense. Instead, it refers to a situation where logistical options shrink, mobility becomes restricted, and key infrastructure becomes a target. When those elements combine, a military force can feel boxed in, even without a physical encirclement. And that sense of pressure can affect morale, operational planning, and the sustainability of long-term defensive positions. As tension has risen, we've seen a shift in tactics. Instead of direct assault, strategies have increasingly focused on weakening supply hubs, disrupting transport routes, and targeting infrastructure that plays a critical role in maintaining control. When those resources begin to falter, the troops stationed in the area may find themselves facing shortages in equipment, ammunition, or reinforcements. Those shortages don't have to be catastrophic to become a problem. Even gradual strain can shift the balance over time. One key element in this situation is the psychological and symbolic significance of Crimea. For Ukraine, regaining or isolating Crimea would be a major strategic victory and a powerful symbol for morale. For Russia, losing Crimea or even appearing to lose control could be politically damaging. The symbolism alone raises the stakes on both sides. Each movement, each strike, and each development carries weight that goes beyond the battlefield. Another important aspect of this situation is the growing use of asymmetrical tactics. Modern conflict is no longer confined to traditional front lines. Drones, long-range strikes, intelligence driven sabotage, cyber operations, and strategic disruptions allow a smaller force to apply pressure without risking large formations in direct combat. These tactics create uncertainty, they force constant adjustments, and they make it harder for troops to stabilize their defenses because the threat can emerge from multiple angles at once. In Crimea's case, this means that any facility linked to logistics, fuel, transport, or communications becomes a potential vulnerability. Over time, repeated strikes or disruptions, even if they do not destroy a target completely, can accumulate into significant operational strain. A fuel depot hit once is inconvenient. A depot hit repeatedly becomes a bottleneck. A bridge partially damaged is a problem. A bridge continuously targeted becomes a liability. That kind of pressure can slowly constrict a territory's ability to function as a military base. Meanwhile, the political side of this conflict plays just as important a role. Political stability relies on maintaining control, projecting confidence, and demonstrating capability. When a region like Crimea becomes harder to supply, harder to defend, or harder to secure, that political narrative begins to crack. And when a narrative cracks, the pressure to restore it intensifies. That pressure can lead to rushed decisions, riskier deployments, or escalated responses, all of which can influence the situation further. In a scenario where troops feel increasingly isolated, morale becomes another key factor. Military history is full of examples where logistical strain undermines morale long before it affects combat capability. When soldiers see supply lines disrupted or infrastructure damaged, it sends a message, intentional or not, that their position is becoming more vulnerable. Eventually, that perception affects how effectively troops can fight, how confidently they can hold positions, and how willing they are to engage under difficult conditions. The local population in Crimea adds another layer of complexity. Under long-term occupation, many civilians find themselves caught between opposing forces. Some fear retaliation, others fear instability, and many simply want the fighting to end. Civilian sentiment in contested regions often shifts based on perceived momentum. If one side appears to be gaining ground or applying more pressure, local attitudes can adapt, whether through cooperation, resistance, or quiet disengagement. That shift in sentiment can influence intelligence flow, local support, and the overall stability of the region. As all these elements interact, the idea of Crimea reaching a breaking point becomes less about a single dramatic event and more about a slow, steady buildup of pressure. A series of small vulnerabilities can merge into a larger strategic issue. A few logistical problems can snowball into operational limitations. And once a military force begins to feel surrounded, whether literally or internally, the situation can evolve surprisingly fast. At the same time, the future remains unpredictable. Russia still maintains significant military assets in Crimea, including air defenses, naval forces, and ground troops. Reinforcements and supplies may continue to flow, even if at a slower pace, and Russia may adapt its strategy to counter pressure or open new supply routes. Much depends on how the situation evolves, how quickly pressure increases, and how effectively both sides adjust their tactics. Another aspect to consider is how international support influences the situation. Conflicts today depend heavily on external supplies, intelligence, political backing, and diplomatic support. When outside nations contribute weapons, training, or equipment, it can shift the balance of power in subtle but meaningful ways. In Crimea's case, even the perception that Ukraine has growing international backing can change strategic decision-making on both sides. In the broader context of the conflict, Crimea has always been a flashpoint. And now, with the increasing challenges to infrastructure, logistics, and military mobility, the peninsula faces more pressure than it has in years. Whether it becomes a decisive turning point depends on how these next stages unfold. But the signs suggest that this region is becoming harder to hold, harder to supply, and harder to defend without significant adjustments. The possibility of Russian troops feeling surrounded, strained, or stretched thin raises real questions about the future of the conflict. It raises questions about sustainability, about adaptability, and about political cost. It also raises questions about how far each side is willing to go to shift the momentum. This moment reflects a deeper truth about modern conflict. The battlefield isn't always defined by territory. It's defined by logistics, by infrastructure, by morale, by perception, and by the ability to adapt faster than your opponent. In Crimea, all of those elements are being tested at once. As we watch the situation continue to evolve, one thing is clear. The peninsula is no longer the secure stronghold it once appeared to be. It's a region under pressure, under scrutiny, and under the weight of competing narratives and strategic priorities. And now, with every new development, the question grows louder. Is this the moment the balance begins to shift? Whatever happens next, the world is watching, analysts are watching, governments are watching, and people on both sides of the conflict are watching, waiting to see whether the events unfolding today will lead to a new phase, a new strategy, or even a new reality for the region. For now, we'll keep following the story, examining the developments, and breaking down what it all means. The situation remains fluid, but the tension is unmistakable. As long as pressure continues to build, discussions about a potential breaking point will continue as well. Thanks for staying with me through this deep dive. If you've been following the situation closely, feel free to share your thoughts on whether Crimea is truly reaching a breaking point, or whether this is simply another complex chapter in a long conflict. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you in the next video.